Hello, welcome to Slate School and our panel discussion entitled Communicating the Mission. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a new, unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, review the panel logistics, and then we'll hear from our four amazing panelists. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we've formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape of education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, like today's, are free and open to the public. We're so delighted to have all of you with us today. I believe that we have learners again joining us from 6 continents. So now I'll describe the basic logistics of this discussion. We have 4 amazing panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during this next hour. And each of our panelists today will give a 2-minute introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key guidance and advice about communicating the mission. We'll then proceed with the panel discussion, and we would invite you to submit additional questions as comments on Facebook, and we will select some of those questions to ask the panelists today as well. So we'll begin with having our panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Dean Cycon. Hi, Dean.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, please, I'm so happy you're here.
Well, shall I go?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Dean Cycon, and I'm the founder and CEO of Dean's Beans Organic Coffee. We're the first social enterprise in the coffee world. We've been around for 27 years. Our mission is to use specialty coffee as a vehicle for progressive social change throughout the coffee lands of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And we do that by combining activism, advocacy, and direct people-centered development. Very unique program that we have, and quite award-winning. We've picked up everything from the Nobel Prize for Business to the Corporate Social Responsibility World Leader Award and all this other cool stuff. But more importantly, we have great relationships with farm communities on the ground in 10 countries and have a meaningful impact on them. That's our purpose. Communicating the mission. Well, the first thing is that I think missions, you have to have a clear mission, what exactly you're doing and what you hope to achieve, and make sure that it's not full of basically meaningless, overused words like, sustainability, which we used in the 1970s and which has become so co-opted that it really is meaningless. I hear elevator cleaning companies say they're sustainable. I hear computer companies say they're sustainable, let alone, food organizations and nonprofits. Well, it has no particular meaning. So be very conscious of what you're saying and make sure that the specific words have meaning, and also that you're saying something in a way that you understand that people are going to hear it, because how we speak, this goes back to Wittgenstein, if you're into philosophy. What we say is one thing, how it's heard is another thing. So I know for myself, and I'll get into this a little later, beating my head against the wall, saying the same thing for 10 or 20 years, only to realize people don't know what I'm talking about because they're hearing the words with a different frame. So getting the mission out is a lot more complex than coming up with a snappy line and then saying it a lot. So we're going to dive deep into that, I'm sure, all of us. Thanks.
That's great, Dean. So glad you're here. And now I'd like to introduce everyone to Karen King. Hi, Karen.
Hi. So my name's Karen King, and right now I have a background in marketing and sales. And when I was about 40 years old, I went back to school and became an elementary school teacher by choice. That's my dream job. And I now teach 5th grade in Newtown, Connecticut. And over the course of my 20-year teaching career, I have had many opportunities. It started as opportunities to connect my 10-year-old students to their counterparts in any country in the world, or in any part of the United States even. We've had pen pals and relationships in Fort Apache, Arizona, and in Kosovo, and in India, and in Ireland, and then eventually in Liberia, in a refugee camp. We had pen pals who were refugees for a while in Ghana. And over the course of my teaching life, I have traveled to many of those places, and that has led to a network of friends, trusted friends that I have around the world, particularly more and more in Western Africa. It has led to me also becoming connected with various service organizations, philanthropists, and other funders who I have worked with over the years to identify viable projects on the ground in various communities and then hook them up with like-minded donors who can bring them to fruition. And we all work as a team to do that. So more recently, in the past year, I have been part of a team of people, 4 of us, who have formed our own 501c3. Our name is Pomotsi. And our goal is to formally identify, we have founders who are in Zambia and Liberia and Toronto and me. We're the 4 of us. And we identify projects on the ground that are viable and that are grassroots, that come from the community. We vet them, and then we seek donors who will help us become part of our team to help this come to fruition. And so that's who I am.
Awesome. Awesome. And now just welcome to firdausjkharas. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially with this school, which places an emphasis on creativity, because that's what I use. So for the last 25 years, I've been creating creative media. And if I were to put my mission statement in one sentence, it is to use mass communication to better the human condition. So I have been creating mainly animation, now in 50 series, the most recent of which is on COVID-19, of course. Basically using animation as a means of mass communications to get around the barriers that we all have as human beings. To the best of my knowledge, my work has been seen in 198 countries by over 1 billion people, and it now exists in 385 language versions. And anybody on this call can go to my Vimeo channel and look at any of it and download it and use it for free. We don't, not charge anything, but we don't even ask for your email or your name or anything else, and there are no restrictions. It's all Creative Commons. You can do whatever you want with it. What I've specialized over the last 25 years, I founded a media company, but a media company with a difference. It's a social enterprise. I run it as a nonprofit corporation. And basically, we get around the barriers that separate us as human beings in communication. So every person has a number of barriers, and barriers are what separate and distinguish us as human beings. To overcome these barriers, we must profoundly understand the barriers, and each person is unique with their own set of barriers. Barriers can be emanating from a person, or it can be directed against a person. And what I mean by these barriers, the various kinds of barriers that we all have within us, our belief system, our culture, our economic status, our prejudices, our racism, religion, stereotypes, traditions, and values. These are the kind of barriers that I've been getting around with mass communication. So to answer your question in a nutshell, how do you state your mission? You have to state your mission understanding your audience and understanding what it is that your audience, who your audience is, and how you're going to get around the barriers that we all have as human beings to reach your audience. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
I see Dean nodding. That's great. Oh, and welcome now to Natacha Poggio. Welcome, Natacha.
Hi, Julie, and I'm very excited to be part of this, session, especially like Firdaus said, for a school that enhances creativity in all learners. So my name is Natacha Poggio. I'm a professor of graphic design at the University of Houston downtown. I'm also the founder and director of an organization called Design Global Change. It's like 12 years now. So every time I have to count, it's like, it looks impressive, but after 27 years with Dean or, Firdaus, it's like very small. But what I've started doing as a design educator was embedding in my classes social responsibility in training my students. So, traditional design used to like create a packaging about a product. So instead of just being any product, I would use as examples companies, or come up with new companies at the time that there were not that many, that will have a social responsibility in place. So the students will have to learn about honeybees and the plight for saving pollinators, and like create a packaging design that will address a company that is doing specifically that, instead of just any packaging. So I have done projects like that, like they are theoretical, but I also have, with Design Global Change, created projects in different countries. So we have mostly focused on wellness, global health, and some of the environmental campaigns in Africa and in Latin America and some in Asia. I have been very proud of supporting the work of, like what Karen was saying, working with local organizations. So teaming up with engineers working on sites in Africa and rural India, and then figuring out how visual communication design could enhance or emphasize the messages that they're trying to communicate with a new intervention, be it like solar panels for pumps for well, or like creating tools for farmers, for rural farmers. So I use graphic design in a way to communicate, the same way that Firdaus is doing animation. So we use, sometimes, most of the times, are like static graphics. It could be like posters, banners, but also we have done things like using like wrap-ups, like kangas, lesos are called in Africa. So women will be carrying a message of wellness with the prints that they wear. So I have, in terms of communicating a mission, I think mostly I think of as an educator more than director of an organization or any other thing. And to me, it's like, following or piggybacking on what Peter said about the understanding the audience. It's after you understand the audience, try to create a message that will resonate for them, not try to make, one message fits all, because that doesn't work. And that's one of the biggest challenges when teaching design. The students are like, looking at their perspective, but it's like, it's not the same, their perspective when you are like in a private school or in a public school, as opposed to working for an organization in Africa or in Latin America. So once you understand your audience, you have to customize your message for each particular location.
Great, great. I think there's been agreement on that so far, and yet I think it's a challenging task. Mm-hmm. It's much easier sort of said than done, and I think it's probably something that has evolved for all of you over time. I think it's very rare, the young person that comes to this kind of work with that real clear understanding and a how-to in that. It's something that evolves over time. And I was when I was thinking about this panel, I was thinking about, Dean, you never sit still. You're always going. You're always working. You're always doing something. And I thought, how has your form of communication evolved over time? How how have things changed for you? And And were there specific moments that you can point to where you saw real growth for yourself in this? And maybe you could talk about those a little bit.
Yeah, well, my path is a little different than most people. I started out as an attorney. Specifically, I wanted to be a social justice lawyer because I come from the Vietnam generation, and lawyers were so a part of organizing people against the war that I said, when I grow up, I want to do that. I quickly found out after a few years that I wasn't a very good lawyer, and talk about communication styles and structures that limit your ability to break through barriers. Well, that's the law, and it wasn't for me. But I was very interested in social change, and I came to realize that for me, with my particular set of skills and interests, and I give this to everybody out there listening, it's less about what you think you should do or can do. It's more about what brings you joy and what your skill base allows you to do wonderfully well and happily. And for me, I mean, I never thought I'd be a business person. That was like being the devil in my generation. But I found out that if I could model business as a means of social good, then I had something to say, and maybe I could influence people. So I was never, my goal was never to be big and become rich and become Starbucks. It was to be impactful. And so communication was the key to that, because anybody can roast coffee, but having a business model that's very different and then being able to teach people what that is and get across what that is, that was the real challenge. In the first 5 or so years of Dean's Beans, I was less interested in that because I was trying to perfect a model, and I was creating something that nobody had done, and that's use business as a development engine in global South villages. So I had different audiences, as was stated earlier. I had the consumer audience, which is interested in the message around the product. I have college student audience, of which I've spoken to hundreds of thousands over the years. We're looking for something very different. They're looking for inspiration. And then I have the farmers and the global South communities that I work with, which is more about, breaking through the hierarchy that they interpret the Northern white guy's visit as being, and saying, okay, we're in this together. I'm with you. I'm asking for your information. I'm only facilitating your developmental process. I'm not here to tell you what to do. And that's a very different stylistic approach. So the first number of years was just about trying to figure that out. And there weren't a lot of guides, back in the 80s. There weren't a lot of guides for that. And so then I had to learn a new skill around the mid 90s, when all of a sudden all these other companies caught on. Wow, all you have to do is show a picture of a farmer and use the word sustainable, and the company, the consumer just goes for it. You don't have to back it up. So I realized that just like, well, there's a theory of capture that says whenever an organization is regulated or something, it ultimately captures the thing that's regulating it. So I won't get into it too much, but the point of it is that all those words and all those concepts got out there through media, through mainstream conversation, and the companies on the other side, or the governments on the other side that really didn't want to bring change, learned how to capture those terms and those concepts and spit them back out through marketing, and very much confuse people as to what's really going on, and make it harder for those of us who are really trying to get a clear message out to get through the static. And that's still a problem today. So I had to learn to take it down a deeper level and break through that. And storytelling was the first vehicle for that. And we've been talking legitimately about what we do on the ground, for 20 plus years. And now I see all these online webinars about, how to become a storyteller to sell your product. And it's sad to me because it's not about authenticity. It's about a new way of getting into the consumer's mind. And so it's a constant struggle, constant need to reinvent, because the rest of the world captures the creative force, but not necessarily for a good purpose. So we all, when we're in the social enterprise sphere, we always have to kind of reinvent our message and even reinvent the way we're approaching the message. I'll leave it at that.
That calls for a tremendous amount of flexibility, you know, and I think flexible thinking is something that we're, you know, I just know that it's an important aspect that we focus on here at school, is this flexible thinking.
Well, you can, because you're a school, but flexibility is also something that organizations are not generally good at, whether they're nonprofit or corporations. You know, they get embedded in a way of thinking and a way of doing things, and to flip and do something different or change the message, it's hard. But I always said we weren't interested in making the money. We were interested in the integrity of the model, so we could flip anytime we needed to with the message and stuff. But when I lecture at business schools, particularly, their response to that is, you can't do that. You know, you got to stick with the same message or whatever for a long, long time. And then the structure gets created around it to support it. And it's very hard to change, organizationally to change.
Yes, that's so interesting. While Dean was talking, Natacha, I was thinking about how, I asked Dean about how his journey has evolved, how it's taken him to the place where he is. And I want to ask you a similar question, but I also am wondering about how your method of teaching students to develop concepts and strategies for visual communication, how that has changed, how that has evolved over time.
Well, for starters, I have become more experienced at teaching and also more informed about how, not just the pedagogy of teaching, but also the impact on their learning. Because to be honest, when I started and I was like this very passionate educator, fresh of graduate school, I was thinking, well, I share this with the student and the student will receive it, you know, mostly like how I used to receive the knowledge, and I will like go ahead. But some students were very reticent because this was the time where sustainability wasn't, when I started teaching, sustainability wasn't something like, you know, like every day. Like Tim was saying, you know, now you just put the word sustainability and then like jump in the wagon, right? But it's no longer, it wasn't at that time, it wasn't like this. And I will have to really push and enforce this. And I actually encountered backlash because it was like, oh, everything is about being green. Everything is about, you know, taking care of stuff. And for me, it was like, that was natural. So I had to figure out how to get it important for them to see their impact. So I remember like the most successful tool was using carbon footprints and getting students just for a week to track their carbon footprint consumption. And that was when it was like, you know, the bright idea illuminated on them. And I know that this is things that are like, are used in schools nowadays. But 15 years ago, it was like not that common to talk about, you know, just track your consumption every day. So the students will have to document taking pictures. I had a student that was tracking how much he smoked by keeping the cigarette butts, and then he brought like a jar at the end of the week, and that's when he realized how much he smoked. It wasn't just like using the packet, but it was like the idea of like what is left from it. And then we talk about, you know, the nicotine consumption, but also what happens with those cigarette butts after they are like disposed. So, you know, it's like the little things. When I started realizing that if I show them the impact of their practices being sustainable or not, that's what is going to resonate with students. And with exposure to, you know, more information, to collaborate with people from different locations, and then invite people to my classes, which had been, you know, like I've been doing like Zooms or Skype or whatever was the tool at the time with many people, because I wanted the students to know voices from other locations, so they see that it's not just the privileged area where, you know, like you might be, but it's like if you talk with educators or students from India or from other parts of the United States, their lives are different, their impact of the surrounding environments are different. So I think that one of the things that my students learned from this experience was first like learning from others, like putting themselves in someone else's shoes by listening to the stories. I believe like the keyword is storytelling. I was listening to Dean and I was just typing some notes of, like the storytelling tells you impactful messages. It's like if you know how to craft them properly. And I think that that's what we are all discussing here. It's like how we communicate, messages, how come, the mission, but as how we communicate a story. So I think that in the evolution of my strategy, I became better communicator of stories.
Beautiful. At our school, we have a writer in residence, and she's actually written a little song that's called "Show Don't Tell." I will not sing it now, but it is a lovely, it is a great reminder, and the kids love it. And I think it's such an important concept in every kind of communication, whether you're communicating your mission or you're sharing information about something that you've learned about that you're passionate about. And I just think the show don't tell idea is it's a really powerful one. And I'm sure I see Karen is nodding. And I think really sometimes our most powerful missions are realized and understood when you show, not just tell. They need to be experienced. And I'm just wondering how you apply that. And Karen, you could talk about your new initiative, your passion for your students. I think there's so many crossovers here. Just go, just talk.
Yeah, I feel like I wear a lot of different hats, and as you've been talking, I've been thinking about this new program that we're having. That's and then I also think about my teaching, but I've decided to go with my teaching. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I teach 5th grade, so I teach 10-year-olds. And I've traveled throughout the world, and I teach in a very an upper middle class rural community of Newtown. It's largely a white community. It started with farmers. Most people live in very nice big McMansions, and it's a very homogeneous group of students that I have, beautiful children. But as soon as I started teaching, one of the things that I wanted to do just naturally, not because I planned this, not because it was an intentional thing, but it's who I am. I just wanted them to understand that the world was much bigger than the town that they were growing up in. And that's why I started by doing really simple things before the internet that just had to do with pen pals, right? Like pen pals in Ireland, pen pal, just a pen pal anywhere, so that we could learn about someplace else and meet other kids. And realized the world was bigger. However, it sort of culminated with a particular project that I know you've already heard about, Julie, but a project that we did when we became pen pals with refugees in Ghana. And they were refugees. Jennifer Staple, who started Slate School, works for, obviously, the founder of Unite for Sight, and she's the one who facilitated this pen pal relationship. And it involved kids in my town, 5th graders, communicating with kids who were in a school in the Budaburam refugee camp in Ghana. And they were Liberian refugees, which when Jennifer first approached me with the idea of having these pen pals, I said yes, without knowing, honestly, where Liberia was, what happened there, that there were refugees, what is a refugee camp like? I had no idea. And how I communicated that with my students and with the families of the children in my class is that I was very open about my own ignorance. I became a learner along with them, modeling, growth mindset and I mean, all these phrases that we use, but I honestly researched it right along their side with them. We looked for books, children's books that would explain what happened. We looked for appropriate videos. We learned all about Liberia. And we did that before we ever started writing. And then we began corresponding. And over the course of our correspondence, I had to give a lot of thought to the stereotypes that we were going to be faced with on both sides. Because, of course, the children in my classroom are living a completely different life than the children that they're writing to. And it's hard for them to understand how different it is without feeling nothing but charitable, sympathy, savior sort of mentality for them. In addition to that, the children who were writing to us think that, our kids are their saviors in some ways, and so it was complicated. So part of what I did after a year of writing was, we did a lot of writing, is that I became a volunteer for Unite for Sight, and I traveled to the refugee camp and stayed there for a month and got to know the teachers and the students and so forth. And the following year, which of course changed my whole perspective because I so much mutual respect and my own stereotypes were being challenged. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Shake your
Yes,
head
for
if
a
you can
second
hear
it
me.
was a little funny, but
Can
now
you hear
you're
me?
good. Yes,
Can you hear me?
we hear you.
Yeah. So after that, we enhanced the project further, included more students in my school. We had 300 fifth graders who became pen pals the second year. And I was trying to figure out how to demonstrate to the children how they are all the same, even though they're different. And so we came up with this idea that we called Eye to Eye, where we found a way to give cameras to children on both sides. And we invented a project that had an assignment, 24 pictures, and the first picture was take a picture of yourself with your family. Second one is take a picture with you and your family having dinner. Take a picture of yourself doing your chore at your house. Things that were universal, holding something that you love. Take a picture of something that you're afraid of. And it was a long, complicated logistical nightmare to get this done, but we did it. And in the end of the project, every child on both sides had given great thought to their photographs, had written about their photographs, and had involved their families in their photographs. And every child got a photo album with their picture of themselves and their family, with their pen pal's picture and their family. And one family having dinner and the other family having dinner. One thing you're afraid of, one thing they're afraid of. And it was 24 pictures. And for me, that sort of communication with my audience, which is 10-year-olds, and with their families was extremely powerful because it didn't take any words. It wasn't my preaching. It wasn't my explaining. It was visual learning in a very personal way, right into someone's house, right into someone's bedrooms, right into a family meal together, right into someone's mind. We had to take a picture of something we wish we could change, something that we think is beautiful. I participated, the principal in my school participated, most of the teachers, the custodian participated, and so did their counterparts on the other side. And that sort of simple but profound communication changed how my students saw, how everybody saw each other, because we began to see that we were the same. I remember kids in my class saying, oh, my pen pal's just like me. He hates his little brother, you know, or hates math, or my pen pal's like me because he has, you know what I mean? And that commonality. And then those kids taking those pictures home, and the mothers being the mothers. And the common threads were strengthened. And I think that way of seeing deeper into someone's life changed me, and I believe it changed those children that year. And in the end of the whole thing, it's a long story, but the refugee camp closed, and our pen pals had to go back to Liberia just as our year was winding up. And we had an evening of celebration at my school. It wasn't a formal fundraiser, but we had an evening of celebration of this friendship, where we showed our whole school became like a photo gallery. And we had all of the pictures, and we had poetry the kids had written about it. We had videotape of the children in the camp speaking and writing, reading their poems about their relationships. And we had kids in our school doing the same thing. And all we could do to help our pen pals was to help with their transportation back to Liberia and the reestablishment of the school in Liberia. And, you know, we raised a lot of money. And the whole project was never intended to do that. But that authentic sort of connection allowed us to do it without any sales pitch and without any blah, 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 blah. The kids, anyway, we were able to, with that, we were able to help the school to move back, reestablish the school in Monrovia, give those families in the school and the teachers in the school a place to go if their villages had been destroyed. Like we felt intimately connected to them. And we were able to reestablish the school for 3 years in Monrovia for those people who had no place to go. And that was sort of the beginning of my falling further down that road. So I'm not sure how to wrap this all up, but for me, that kind of connection, the way my message is always personal, it's always authentic, and it's not meant to be big, it's not meant to bring everybody in. It's just meant for me to see into someone's heart and someone to see into mine, and then use those connections to affect positive change for everybody. Does that make sense?
I think you said it.
That's all I got. Okay.
I just want to say, when we first, asked Karen to be part of this panel, she recently wrote to me and she said, no, I'm not, what do you mean? What's my mission? I'm not sure what my mission is. And I knew, for someone who knows you and for someone who's seen your work and understands what you've done in your career with your kids, it's easy to see your mission. I think everybody can see your mission. So beautiful. So now I have to ask Firdaus. Firdaus, you are a master communicator. You've worked on so many different kinds of projects, and I just am curious, how did it come to be animation for you? How did that emerge as your lens and your way to communicate? Why did you pick it? Did it pick you?
I guess in a way it picked me. It actually started in the mid-1990s with UNICEF. So I give credit for my work to two people who used to work at UNICEF. We took the Convention on the Rights of Children, which was then new, and we animated every single right in it. And ultimately 2,200 broadcasters played them around the world. And this is in the times when we had to send tapes around the world to broadcasters, and it became the most watched media on human rights. And so that's kind of started my thinking about using animation. But I used my previous background because I had a background in international affairs. So everything I do in animation is simply applying my previous background in international affairs to the issues that I deal with. But why animation? So I do live action as well, but mainly I'll give you 8 points why animation works so well. Firstly, you can reach any audience. It doesn't matter whether it's a global audience or a local audience, you can reach an audience with animation much better sometimes than you can reach an audience with live action. In some cases, on many issues I've dealt with, for example, in HIV/AIDS prevention, on malaria prevention using mosquitoes and so on, it is animation and only animation that really is going to get the message across. Secondly, you can create universal characters. As Disney and Pixar and all these other companies have shown, you can create characters that resonate throughout the world, quite literally throughout the world, and also against all the other criteria that one has, the classes, the economic status of people, the educational level of people, and so on. Thirdly, the audience is accepting of what the messaging is, because my approach is very much to get the audience to internalize the message. What I mean by that is I can't impose a behavior change on you. I need you to understand the messaging and then internalize it and come to your own conclusion to change your own behavior. Fourth, there's a global acceptance of animation. So everybody's used to animation. It doesn't matter which country you're in. It doesn't matter which ethnicity you are. And it doesn't matter which language you talk. Fifth, there's a sense of non-realism to animation, so that you know that what you're seeing is not real. So the most famous thing I ever did was create funny animated condoms to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS. And there had been many campaigns in many countries using real condoms that were thrown off the air because people objected to them. And then, 3 funny animated condoms come along. They have arms and they have legs and they talk. And so we even got them in Iranian television. So there is a non-realism to what you're seeing, and therefore you're more accepting of the message. Then there is a suspension of your disbelief system. So you know what you're seeing is not real. You suspend your disbelief. If you had something that was real, and you have what is called a disbelief system that comes into effect, where you may or may not agree, understand, or appreciate or internalize what you're seeing. But if it's animated, you have what is called a suspension of your disbelief system, and therefore you can understand and accept the message. Seventh, it's very easy to sync to other languages. So if you have a Black person speaking Japanese in Japan, of course there are some Black people in Japan, no doubt, but you know, it does create a disconnect with the audience sometimes, and it's very difficult in, you know, in Africa to have a lot of white people or whatever. So that if you have an animated character speaking any language, literally any language, you're accepting of it, and it's easy to sync because you don't have the lip sync problem that you have with live action. It's very rare for somebody to look at an animated series that has been well done and say that has not been produced in that particular language. But it's very easy when there's live action that is a dubbed version, and that person is not really speaking that particular language. And lastly, it allows for innovation. Very easily allows for innovation. And right now, I've just finished a series on COVID-19 because I've been most concerned in COVID-19 about the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, which are basically people who can't move. And what I mean by that is, for example, we saw it on the ship where people could not get off the ship. We're seeing it in Canada. We're seeing it in long-term care facilities where people are getting COVID because they can't move. And what I concentrated on was refugee camps. So I've just created a series that's now in 15 languages that over 90% of the world's refugees speak because they can't move. For the most part, if they're in refugee camp, they're quite often surrounded by the country's military. They're not allowed to leave the camp. Hygiene facilities are very limited, and health facilities are very limited in any case, even in the best of times. And now it's even worse. So refugees, prisons, long-term care facilities, these are the most vulnerable, I think, of the people who are exposed to COVID-19 right now. And so I've been concentrating on these people. It allows for innovation because you can easily change something. And COVID-19 is a good example where the information has been rapidly changing. So for example, in Canada, originally in January, February, we were told not to wear masks. Like everybody in my country was told, don't wear a mask. We don't want you to wear a mask. Well, Europe and Asia started by wearing masks, and then Europe wore masks. And then Canada finally said, okay, yes, wear a mask. So that kind of changing information is very easy to do in animation because I can instantly in a computer put in new information, create a new part of it. So animation allows for innovation, and it's very easy to manipulate and change the messaging. Why it's very much more difficult than live action. So all of this has led me to create 50 series now that are animated on these kinds of topics, just on health. I mean, I've worked on COVID-19, on Zika, on malaria, on HIV/AIDS, on Ebola extensively in West Africa in 2014, including Liberia. So, you know, these are, I mean, that's just on health. The plague in Madagascar a couple of years ago, believe it or not. So it's much easier to use animation when you're addressing these kinds of issues. I would say that what I do though is very difficult. It's the most difficult approach, and that is I use humor to bring the audience to a serious point. And I think that humor is a critical element in this because a lot of people try and bash you over the head with this kind of messaging. And the best example I think of is violence against women. A lot of social messaging will show you a battered woman and basically say, don't do this. Well, to me, it just further stigmatizes the woman. It perpetuates violence against women. It shows an image of a battered woman, and it does nothing to address the person whose behavior you want to change. And that's not the woman; that's the person who's beating her. So, so I think that in these kinds of messaging, I use humor, even on issues like rape. I've used humor to bring the audience to the serious point. So it's animated and it's humorous and it's multilingual and it's freely distributed. So those are the 4 tenets of my work.
That all makes good sense.
Can I ask something too, Firdaus?
Yes.
So where do you source your very talented artists and storytellers?
I source them literally around the world. So I have a huge Rolodex, and for example, in COVID-19, it took me only 9 days to create, even with the lockdowns, to create all these 15 languages, and that includes Burmese and Tigrinya and Somali and so on. So I have a big Rolodex of people that have worked with me, because I've now done it in 385 languages, different series. But I think that we always use local people, and we always version them in local lingua. So what I mean by that is some of my series might have, 8 different versions of English. It's same language, but 8 different versions of it with different accents and different words used in English to make particularly the humor come across locally in that particular country. So it's the same language, but using a different script completely in English or French or Spanish or whatever. Yeah.
Great. Dean, I'm wondering now, I'm going to take us a little bit away from kind of mode of communication, and I'm going to return a little bit to mission, because I think in a way we've talked about this a little bit in every single panel, indirectly in some, but this idea that we need feedback as humans to make sure that what we think we're communicating is what we're actually doing in terms of our mission. And one of our panelists said that he has a board of directors, and his wife is the chairman, and she'll tell him if he's veering away from his actual mission. And I'm just wondering about that kind of authentic feedback for you, and where you seek it, and how that affects what you do.
Well, it's easy for me because I've got 16 people that I work with, and everybody feels very empowered to say what they think, and they do. But for years, I've been telling people in the social enterprise space about, I very honestly reflect on what I see, and oftentimes that's someone either misrepresenting what they're doing, not because they are trying to be misrepresentative, but because they're being aspirational. And I think this is something that we all have to watch out for, because we want to help, we want to do good things. And so sometimes we have a tendency to couch what we're doing or the success of what we're doing as maybe a little more than it is, because that's where we're hoping to go. And unfortunately, it gives a false impression, and it's not authentic in the slightest when that happens. And so I think first and foremost, we all have to be self-reflective and honest, not goal-oriented, that, we want to achieve this goal of being in 13 different communities and making sure 50,000 people see my animation, or where that's an outcome. But to me, the goal is the authenticity and the integrity of the communication. And that, interestingly, is exactly the opposite of what you learn in business school, where the goal is not authenticity, the goal is the outcome, right? I give talks about the 5 myths that you learn in business school, because business is a culture just as much as being Jewish is a culture. It has its own norms, it has its own mannerisms, it has some acceptabilities. And I think people don't really get that, but in the world of business, it's a serious problem because the norms of business are not our norms in the world. And I mention it, business, because, and I went into business, not because, again, because I wanted to be in business, but because business touches everything we do. Zoom is a business. You know, the headphones are a business. Every bit of food we have is a business, whether it's from Celestial Seasonings or Tetley, it's still a business. So business touches every aspect of what we do. And I thought, you know what? If I want to have an impact, I want to try to find something that affects everybody so people can identify. And that's when I got into coffee. It was purely, I always say, if someone had walked in and said, Dean, you should apply this to shoes, then I would have been Tom's instead of Dean's, you know. The first guy that walked in happened to be coffee, so I became a coffee guy. It's purely a vehicle for me. I'm not a coffee guy, even after all these decades. But integrity is all. And one of the problems, again, with organizations, because organizations create their own, in a sense, mentality, their own AI brain, is that organizations want to self-protect. You know that every time you call up the telephone company or any place else and you want to complain, the person takes it personally that you're talking to, gets very defensive, you know, because people identify with their organization, with their family, with their giant family. And so, again, another barrier is trying to break past people's identification with that thing that they're involved in, whether it's a government or a nonprofit or a tribe, you know, and allow for real communication. It's not easy.
Yeah. This question, actually, I'm going to ask of both Natacha and Karen, because you have students that are, you know, along the way, but still at the very beginning of finding their own voice. And I'm just wondering how you approach helping students find their own voice, and how this relates to helping them find their own mission. So I don't know who wants to go first. I'm looking at Natacha. She just nodded. So Natacha's first.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, I have taught at multiple institutions now. This, you know, like change, the culture of the institution is different as well. I started in Connecticut and it was a private school. So it was like a different design program. And with those students, I was just helping them finding a voice through the visuals, right? Like what they are creating as talented artists, designers. So it would be like how to communicate something that you're passionate about through your skills. At the institution where I am right now, it's a little bit different because I see students only a glimpse of time as they go and move on through, you know, courses to continue with their larger program. So it's not that I've seen them from the very start as freshmen all the way to senior year. So my chance of exposing them to this empowerment is limited, but at the same time, I feel that they have a larger need because predominantly my school is first generation college students. So I really feel like the mission that I have right now is even more important than I ever have. And I think that when they started realizing that those very, you know, small skills that they're learning in design, you know, using a design tool can actually communicate something. Like what Firdaus was saying, it's like, you know, different languages, different cultures, you know, a message that just like an illustration, a very simple illustration that they didn't even know how to do at the beginning of the semester, then can reach out to their grandparents or to their siblings and then show it, and everyone like gets like, you know, bright eyes and excited by like this creation. That's a way of getting them to realize that they have a voice. And even if they're not going to continue as designers later on, they can actually communicate. They now have tools to communicate that they didn't know they had at the beginning, the first place. This is a program that is like enhancing arts and communication skills. So they learn communication, like theoretical aspects of communication. But sometimes it's just like, like a very simple graphic about endangered animals for them tells a story. And in my particular case, like in the last semester and a half, especially with this semester going, very different than what everyone expected, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, I think that it has been challenging for students to represent that voice through the skills, but they are saying it more eloquently when they share things with me. As opposed to, like the specific assignment that they have to create. But mostly, I think that in the end, because of the school mission that is like empowering and like getting everyone to finish strong with their degrees, I think the students have this like very strong culture of like, we can do it. And, like I am very happy and proud to be part of that.
That's great. That's great. Karen, what are you doing with those fifth graders?
Well, I feel like a fish out of water here because I'm not exactly in the same boat as all of you. But I can tell you that several years ago, early in my teaching career, I had a child in my class who was a high-functioning autistic child, Asperger's syndrome, genius, highest IQ we've ever seen. On the other hand, had very serious social and emotional challenges. And it was quite dramatic. I was pretty unequipped for handling it, and it happened in my class, happened very visually every single day in my class. It played out. And that year, what I learned and what my students learned, sometimes, I remember one time after one very dramatic incident in the class where he was physically acting out and was taken out of the class, and I sat the kids down and I said, look, everybody has gifts and challenges, right? Gifts and challenges. And I say it like this. And so some people have gigantic gifts, and usually those people have gigantic challenges. And then other people have small gifts, and they have small challenges. And I talked about, so the boy's name, so what was Johnny's, what's Johnny's? Every hand went up and go, oh, he's so smart. He corrects you every single day when you're teaching, and he knows more than even the teacher. And I was like, that all of this is true. Now, what's his challenge? The challenge is that he can't look someone in the eye. He can't respond appropriately. He can't read social cues, and those dramatic. And once we sort of identified that and saw how they evened each other out, we started talking about that, about all of us. And it was powerful. It was a big moment for me because, and I talk about this now all the time in my class, because all of us are kind of threatened by people who have skills that we don't. As an adult, I feel intimidated all the time. On the other hand, when I recognize in myself that I have gifts, that I am very intelligent, I have it together, but just in a different way than somebody else. And my challenges and my gifts lie in different places. And that there's the synergy of working together with people who bring different gifts and different challenges is powerful on a small scale and on a large scale. It's like a life lesson. So yes. When you go around with a bunch of 10-year-olds and you start saying, okay, so what do you think your gifts are? And then the kids start listing their gifts. I'm funny and I'm very friendly. I'm this one. I'm really good at writing. And then you start going around saying, okay, let's talk about our challenges. Like, what are your challenges? And they'll say, oh, I can't pass math, It starts to help you to expose yourself about it, stop hiding things, and recognize that you are not just your challenge and you are not just your gift. We're kind of a combination of every single person, and it makes it much easier for me to maneuver my way through life and people, thinking of things that way. I used to, before I used to work for an HMO. I worked with a lot of doctors, medical doctors, and I was in sales and marketing, so they all thought, that I was like the fluff, of the organization. And I remember sitting in these meetings with these highly intelligent people, and being afraid to say anything because they were they were talking about things that I had no idea about. And I just knew how to talk to customers and patients. That's what I know how to do. And at one point, after some time, one of the physicians, the chief, came to me and he said, would you be able to do a workshop with the physicians about how to speak to patients? And I remember thinking, like, at that moment, like, wow, like, they're very smart, but and they're very smart too. Like, they're very smart, but I have to teach them something. You know what I mean? Because that intelligence, sort of that bright light that was shown on their medical skill, can sometimes leave things lacking in the other area. And so it made me see my world that way, which is what I showed my class. So for me, that's how I think kids find their voice. I think it's how they figure out what their passion's going to be and what their gifts are, and then follow that later in life. That's my thing. That's all I got.
Well, I think what you say is, it relates so much to what Dean was saying too, about this idea of being authentic. Being authentic. Yeah. You know, we're never going to be authentic if we're trying to be, you know, somebody else. Even if we're the most brilliant copy of them, we're only a copy. And when we're copying someone else, we're just, you know, we're hiding the great things that we have that maybe haven't been uncovered.
And how many people do you know wait until they're older to kind of get that? So the sooner you can be yourself, the sooner you can come and present just as you are with all of your vulnerabilities, the better for everybody. You know, I'm 60. I took me this long in many cases to be my authentic self, you know, and now I'm going to be my authentic self because there's not much time left. I'm going to make the most of it, you know? So I think starting at 10 is a good thing.
Me. I cannot really believe it or bear that it's after 2, and we've been at this for more than an hour. But I am wondering if our panelists could stay for a couple more minutes, because I do just have one more question that I think could be answered by all of you, and I think it would be helpful to everyone listening. I guess I'm just wondering, we talk a lot about innovation. And I think the best innovation is something that happens when we're exchanging ideas, not when we're thinking about things alone in our heads. And I'm wondering what you can recommend to the people who are listening here about communication strategies that you found to be effective, and that you think translate well to other areas beyond what you do individually, whether it be to schools or to families in situations that they're in right now where communication is very different. There's a lot of time for communicating with their families, which may or may not be great for them at the moment. And there's a lot of difficulty and estrangement in the world with communicating with others. So I'm wondering if you could all just talk a little bit to that. And I'm gonna start with Dean.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the key to successful communication is humility, and seeing myself as a facilitator, not a person who is there to use the word should, or even to respond to someone's suggestion or input or sharing with any kind of judgment, but rather to encourage it and then see what bubbles out of the collective. That's how we do our development work successfully in 27 years. In the next room, my wife is doing support groups all over the country. She's a facilitator of support groups for postpartum mothers, for first responders, and it's all about non-judgmental facilitation of the process of bringing out whatever that unique thing, Karen, that you have, letting it shine and letting it be shared by others with humor. Thank you, Firdaus, very much for that input. I completely agree. With humor and with humility. I'll leave my sharing at that.
Beautiful. Firdaus, what can you leave us with that we can all use?
Well, I think innovation is a result of creative thinking. I don't think innovation happens by itself. It is actually, it is the implementation of creativity. And I'm actually writing a book on that. Which will come out this summer on creativity and how that is it comes before the innovation. And I do think that, I mean, I agree with everything that the panel has said so far. I do think that the greatest challenge we have in communications is simply believing in what we're saying. So I always tell young people, what is the one thing, the one characteristic that you need to be a social entrepreneur or a mass communicator or to get your point across? It's passion. If you don't have passion, if you don't firmly believe in what you're communicating, you're not going to be able to communicate it well. It is passion. And so, you know, the school systems, for example, I think have done a fairly bad job up to now of the public school system in North America has done a fairly bad job of allowing children to be creative and to bring their creativity into adulthood. Every child is creative. Everybody, you know, puts blocks together. Everybody paints when they're young. Everybody uses their imagination when they're young. And then we suck that creativity out as students go through most of the public school system that we have, at least in North America. I went to a very creative high school in India, and then I came to Pennsylvania for a year, and the difference in the school system was absolutely enormous. I think that that's what we've done, and so I applaud Slate and all these other schools that are trying to keep creativity in the students and allow them to come into adulthood with that creative brain still intact. And they will use it. It doesn't matter if they go on to be doctors or engineers or whatever, they will use it later in life.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Natacha, what are your thoughts? How can we do better?
I think that I partly believe that innovation results on the idea exchange, but I also think that it's important to have some introspection in order to like consider that idea and then exchanging with others in order to like grow that idea, right? But if we think about, you know, some things are like, you know, we found by mistake, like vaccines and stuff that has been found just because we were not really looking there, but by accident. And I think partly it's just like not trying to make everything perfect. I think the challenge, especially, you know, when I talk to my students, obviously I want the best outcome on their results, but at the same time, I just want them to be experimental, to like, you know, try different things. And sometimes the result is not going to be perfect, but at least they challenge their mind to go on a different path. So in this time when so many things, you know, even like trying to make the perfect podcast, the perfect, you know, Zoom videos, all these things. And then we just look at memes that are like simple, you know, they have humor and they don't have like the most amazing typography, but they are like successful and they make us happy. So how can we let ourselves be more open to less perfection in our lives, but more, you know, like experimentation? So I think that would be my message.
Love it. We talk all the time here about the learning journey, how it goes up and down and up and down. And
exactly.
You don't learn a lot up here. It's comfortable, but you don't learn a lot. It's when you're trying to climb the hill again. Yeah. Karen, what should we know?
For me, I think it is to as much as possible, let your mind take you where it's going to go, and be willing to share it, even if it's not perfect, even if it sounds crazy, but also to be open to other people. I find a lot of people are just in their own minds, they have their own ideas and are not always seeking to understand. I mean, that's one of the things I say in the classroom all the time, is seek to understand. When you are looking at your audience, before you can ever get to them, you need to seek to understand their perspective and where they're coming from before doing anything else. And so for me, it would be letting go of the need to be perfect or to appear perfect. And then secondly, to always seek to understand who you're talking to and be willing to have your vision be flexible when you have actually been able to merge with that person or with the other ideas. That's kind of abstract, but does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think it's just right around, the consensus of the group too. I'm afraid we do have to conclude. This is the time we had for this panel. I want to thank all of our panelists for the generous sharing of your wisdom. I learned a lot today. I say this every day, actually. But I'm particularly grateful to all of you. I really am. And I'm sure that everyone who tuned in around the world learned a lot. And we're making lemonade out of lemons here. And sometimes it's pretty good. So I want to thank you again. And I'm going to close our panel today as we close all of our meetings here at Slate School. We say thank you very much. We have an intention, and then we say positive rice to you all. Positive rice to all of you and to all of you watching. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So long from Slate School.
Thank you.